Welcome to China Tech Talk, the weekly discussion of technology and startups here in China. I'm John Artman, editor-in-chief of Technode.com. And as always, I'm joined by Matthew Brennan, founder of China Channel. And so if you're not living in China, you may be unaware that we just finished Spring Festival, Chinese New Year's, the Lunar New Year. And, you know, if you've lived in China, if you do live in China, then you know that it's a time that really kind of everything stops, and certainly it did for Technode. But Matt, I understand that you took kind of like a pre-holiday before the actual Spring Festival.
I went down to Sanya, the Hawaii of China. My first time, actually. Have you ever been down there, John?
Yeah, years and years and years ago, before it got. I mean, so this is like when Hu Jintao, right after Hu Jintao declared it the Hawaii of China, or like it's supposed to be like an international, resort place of China. I went down there for a reporting trip to see, how things were going. And I understand that it's developed a lot since then. I mean, especially around holiday times.
Yeah, I was really annoyed with my wife because her passport didn't renew it, so we couldn't leave the country. And I was like, it's cold even in Sichuan, which is a fairly southern place in China. I hate the cold so much. I was like, okay, well, where can we go? And we ended up going to Haikou and then going to Sanya.
How did you find Haikou? Because I went there and I found it was nothing special.
Yeah, even the locals will tell you Haikou is nothing special. I was quite surprised. They were very honest and very direct. They were like, "Don't spend any time here. Just get down to Sanya."
Yeah, pretty much. Well, it's funny. It's funny because if you do want good weather and not too many people, you should go where I went for Spring Festival. I went to Xiamen. It was, I mean, probably the best Spring Festival I think I've ever had. So my parents-in-law took the kids down there about a week and a half before the holiday proper. They're retired, so they took the kids down there first. We got an Airbnb, like a 4-bedroom Airbnb. I'm not going to say how much we spent on it. I will say that that for what it was, I think we got a pretty good deal. And we just, the kids and the parents-in-law were there for about 3 weeks. My wife and I were there for about a week and a half, and it was amazing. Like, just, I think having a bigger house, because our apartment's quite small, and being in an area where it's not, I wouldn't say it's warm, but it's not cold, and just very relaxing. Not too many people. The people that were there are fairly polite. It's just right across the strait from Taiwan, and I think Taiwanese people in general are very polite. And yeah, I mean, I got so much reading done. It was absolutely amazing. Like I read more fiction than I've read in that week and a half than I think I've read in the last 6 months. So that was super, super nice.
Yeah, how are the beaches?
Well, there's not really beaches. I mean, or if there are, we didn't go to them. There is like this really famous island called Gulangyu, and I think maybe people live on it. I'm not sure, but we tried to get tickets for the ferry, and they were always sold out, and it was just a huge pain in the ass. So we didn't do it. And then there was a park that was right on the beach line, and it's not so much a beach; it's more just like a pier with some sand, and then there's the water. And it wasn't even hot enough really to like make a beach outing of it, but the kids played in the sand, and they had a lot of fun with that.
Oh, nice. Well, I've yet to make it to Xiamen. It's one of those places that's eluded me for over a decade now.
Yeah,
I've been to province a couple of times, and I've been to Taiwan, but I've never actually made it to Xiamen. There we go.
Yeah. I mean, that was my first time as well. And one of the reasons we went there was because Anna took the kids down there about a year ago, last summer. think it was last summer. Anyway, some time ago, and she really really liked it. And so we decided just to do it again. I think that model of vacation, I think, works really really well for our family, and so we're thinking about doing the same thing, but in Shenzhen next year, and making some trips into Hong Kong. I just got back from Hong Kong last week, and man, I love that city. It's
Right,
really
yeah,
great.
I do like Hong Kong as well. So, John, did you do any shopping while you were on holiday?
Yeah, when I was in Hong Kong, I did bought some stuff. My wife, whenever I go to Hong Kong, my wife always gives me a shopping list.
Interesting. Did
Um,
you experience any staffless stores or new retail?
Well, no, that's the thing. Hong Kong is very far behind when it comes to that type of stuff. I did get a chance to use WeChat at one of their larger like pharmacy cosmetic stores, and it was really cool because you use the WeChat the WeChat Pay function, the money function, and you give them your QR code. They scan it, and it charges your account in RMB, but then it pays, it settles to them in Hong Kong dollars, and so that was really kind of cool, so that we don't have to worry about exchange now. But I would say in general, Hong Kong is quite far behind with a lot of these types of innovations.
It is, yeah, it is, and I think that's what we're going to cover today, right? With the
That's exactly what we're going to cover. Well, yeah,
yeah,
it's exactly what we're going to talk about today. A little bit about some of the innovations that Alibaba and Tencent are making in retail. Certainly, mobile payments is a huge part of that. But I think that you and I have talked a lot about that already, and certainly I would say that if people are interested, looking at the Smile to Pay episode, listening to the Smile to Pay episode, I think would be a good chance to do that. Also, the reference episode that we did a few months back as well. But for this episode, we want to look specifically at this kind of offline retail and how the two giants are approaching this area. And so, Matt, I understand that you did a bit of research into some of the investments that Alibaba and Tencent have been making. And Alibaba, Jack Ma, they call it new retail. Tencent, they call it smart retail because they can't use the term that Jack Ma coined, but it's basically the same thing. But I mean, like, what did you find? I mean, were there any like what really popped out at you about their recent investments in that area?
yeah. I think that's a good place to start. Actually, it's like the terms. Let's get the terms out there. You just mentioned like, and this phenomenon that we're going to cover today, and we might do a couple of other episodes on it because it really is a big thing. There's a lot of investment in this area. It's definitely going to be one of the hot topics of 2018. So that's why we feel we need to cover it today. Alibaba calls it new retail, and Tencent calls it smart retail. And Jingdong, I think, also has a term boundless retail. There's a couple of things going on in this, but as far as I can work out, they're all kind of referring to the same thing, and it's just splitting hairs on what they actually refer to it as. And that is the trend of these. In one respect, you could look at it from an investment point of view as being tech companies, tech giants, what we're going to be covering today, investing and partnering with more sort of traditional retail, offline focused businesses. So there's been an incredible amount of activity in the past. I would say it started summer last year, something like that. Where Alibaba, I think, was the first ones to really move in heavily into this space and start putting down some big money. And so in 2018, we're recording this in March, and already there's been many deals. It's like every week it feels like to me every week there's like a new announcement from someone making an investment. So what the hell is going on here? Why are they spending so much money, so much time, so much activity in this space? Is what we want attempt to delve into today. But it's actually a really complex area. I think that's another reason why we probably want to spend a couple of episodes on this and maybe get some guests in and break it down a bit, because this phenomenon is not just one thing. I think there's several trends happening here, and it's actually, I found it pretty difficult to work out what the hell is actually going on.
Yeah, I think
TechNode as well has written a lot about this area. There's many articles on TechNode about this area, and I have yet to see. I was doing the research and trying to find someone online who could actually, in English or Chinese. I think the information in Chinese is much better than English right now for deeper analysis. The English stuff I can find is very superficial, most of it, of what the hell is actually going on here.
Well, exactly. No, I mean, I think that we were talking before we started recording, and I think that one of the big reasons that it is so confusing is that the companies themselves, so Alibaba and Tencent and JD, they themselves have not really clearly explained what their strategy is. I think that we can kind of tease out a few broader trends that would kind of help to explain some of what these companies are doing and their investments and things like that. But I think that in general, number one, there is just so much activity going on that it's difficult to really kind of parse out specifically, what exactly the specific strategies are of these companies, and in particular when it comes to Tencent and Alibaba. But in general, I think that really, if we take a look at this from the perspective of the increasing the the lessening, if that's a word, the distance between online and offline is decreasing. And I think that this is true for every market around the world. It's not just China, but it is something specifically happening in China, where more and more, and in particular because of mobile payments and all of these online to offline services, that the lines between what is the internet, what is online, and what is offline is blurring. And both Alibaba and Tencent, they recognize this, and they're looking to be first movers in that area. And it's actually really interesting because, Matt, as you said, a lot of the activity in this new retail area is fairly recent. However, you look back into 2015. Alibaba invested into Suning, which is this large offline electronics retailer, and I have to wonder if, on the one hand, they were doing it because it kind of made sense. Okay, we're e-commerce, and Suning is retail. So Suning at that point, a lot of these Dazhong Suning, they weren't doing very well because they were not responding to online e-commerce very well. And there's a lot of friction going to offline stores in general in China. So you look even from back then, Alibaba saw that opportunity, and now Tencent, starting from last year, both Tencent and JD, starting from last year, are really looking more and more into it. I think that one of the big areas is, when we look at the new retail, is a lot of produce, so fresh food. And maybe we can talk about it in depth a little bit later, but I just want to mention that the two big players in this area right now are Alibaba with the Hema store, and then JD with their Daojia service. Both are very different models, actually.
Right.
But sorry
to interrupt, John, but I mean, Seven Fresh would be the correct, that would be the JD's version of Hema, right? Not Daojia. From my research, I can see that Seven Fresh seems to be like a copy of Hema. They seem to be very similar.
Right.
Whereas Daojia, I would say,
it's
an app,
okay.
kind of more sort of online thing.
Right. I see your point. And so I guess the point that I'm trying to make here is that looking. I mean, I'm not so sure how competitive Seven Fresh is going to be. Whereas the reason I was bringing up Daojia is that's a real service that's been active for quite some time, and is really going in. It really plays into JD's strength. I haven't done very much research into Seven Fresh in particular, so if you can enlighten me, that would be great. But for me, when I think about new retail in China, I'm really kind of thinking about JD Daojia, which, now that you bring it up, may not be quite in that category, and Hema Xiansheng, the offline store,
Yeah,
by
certainly in
Alibaba.
terms of mind share, I think I was definitely for international mind share. In this space, when people think of this trend, definitely Alibaba has run away with it in terms of Hema supermarket being the poster child for new retail or smart retail. That is by far and away the case study that everyone brings up. So they've done, again, a very fantastic job on PR. But as we've and the other big one actually is in the States. It's Amazon Go, which we haven't talked about yet. But Amazon is also, this trend is very much, they're very much pushing it and making huge investments in it. And actually, I think globally, probably they have the better PR in this area of like what they've been able to achieve with their technology. And admittedly, a very few number of stores. There's only like one or two Amazon Go stores right now. There's only one. Okay,
There's only
so
one. Yeah, there's only
this
one
is
right
it. I
now.
mean, like,
Yeah.
it's very interesting because I think Amazon Go, in terms of the technology that Amazon has there, is better than what we have here in China right now. But
Yes.
there's only one of
Yes.
them, so it's like we're ahead of you, but we only have one store. Whereas China, I think, broadly is much further ahead because the giants are already invested in many different chains, and there's hundreds and thousands of like staffless stores and experiments going on with things like Hema, with Seven Fresh, and all in Jingdong Daojia, and all these other sort of models going on, experimentation, and we can see it's really flourishing here in China. But globally, in terms of mindshare for this technology, I think Amazon is still the one that's the most impressive and got the most coverage. Amazon Go.
Yeah, and I think that this is kind of going into a much deeper discussion about unmanned stores, and I think that we do want to devote an entire episode to unmanned stores, but I think that to my mind, when we're looking at Hema and Amazon Go, I don't think are quite parallel cases. Really, when we look at Amazon Go, what we're looking at is an unmanned store, and Hema isn't exactly an unmanned store. They have actually quite a few they have quite a few staff, and then the checkout process is still similar to the checkout process at a regular grocery store, except that you use Alipay. Whereas something like Bingo Box or Oshan's what Oshan is doing, and some other examples of unmanned automated stores, if you will, those are a bit more on the same, I would say, again, in parallel with Amazon Go. And I recently wrote an editorial piece about this, and I think that again, I don't want to say too much about it, but I think that when we're looking at Amazon Go versus other unmanned stores, I mean, Amazon, they're very perfectionist. They're very good at creating amazing customer experiences, and that's really what's driven Amazon forward, both online, and now I think it's really what's going to drive them forward offline. Whereas China, it's all about speed. Just get it out there. Expand as quickly as possible. Get your name out there. I mean, Bingo Box is a great example. I mean, one of the first movers. And there's a bunch of other players in the market right now with varying degrees of success, but the customer experience isn't all that great, and especially if you compare it to Amazon Go. And the point that I made in the editorial is that in the end, I mean, customer experience isn't always the number one thing that companies or customers are actually looking for. What they're looking for is a new experience. What they're looking for is a way to decrease the already high amount of friction they have in their daily life. And I think that unmanned stores in general, even though the technology isn't going to be as good and the experience overall is not going to be as good, they're going to develop quite rapidly in China. But again, we can talk more about that later. So I guess, I mean, like looking at, I mean, so as I mentioned before, I think the broader trend here really is the decreasing space between online and offline. But it's kind of it's interesting to see how Tencent is moving into this, right? Because I mean, Alibaba makes sense, JD makes sense. They're both retail / e-commerce platforms. But then why do you think Tencent is getting into it?
Good question. It's clear it's become a race, and we've talked about this trend a couple of times on the podcast, how when one of the players jumps into an area, the other one follows, and then it becomes super hot, and they get really competitive. If we think about bike sharing that we've talked about so much before, same thing there. They pick sides, they partner up, and then the whole area becomes super hot. So we've alluded to these deals that are going on. Let's just discuss a couple of them, or put down some numbers here. What actually is going on in terms of the investments in this area. So Alibaba's made investments into a couple of retail groups. Some of the big deals you've mentioned already, John, Suning. That was actually nearly a $5 billion deal that they did back in 2015. And Alibaba owns 20% of Suning. Suning's an electronics retailer. Suning and Gourmet, I think, are the two market leaders in electronics, and pretty much you'll see those guys everywhere in all tier 1, tier 2 cities. Alibaba's also invested in Time. That was last year. That's a department store and shopping mall chain. That was about $2.5 billion that they put there, and they own the majority of that now. So that's actually that's quite different. That's also one of the differences, I think, between the two, is that Alibaba is, when they're investing, they're taking larger stakes than Tencent. Tencent is actually, they're also putting down a lot of money, but the percentages that they're taking in these companies is much smaller overall. There might be one or two exceptions to that rule, but it seems their strategies in terms of investment in these traditional offline retailers is that's one of the differences. Alibaba's also put money into Sun Art Retail, which is a supermarket chain. Again, almost about $3 billion there, about 36%. New Huadu Industrial Group, Beijing Easy Home, which is furnishing. Those are the other two prominent ones. Those ones are a bit smaller. They're about $500 million each. Then Tencent, if we look on their side, they've had this like announcement with Carrefour, but I haven't seen they've kind of got this agreement to do stuff, but I haven't seen any numbers around it, which is, I don't know if they.
Yeah, I haven't either.
Why that is? Maybe it's just they don't want to announce it publicly or whatever. But I've yet to look into that. Yonghui is the big one they did last year. That's over $500 million. VIP Shop, which is the number 3 e-commerce player in China, again over $500 million. But percentage-wise, quite small. And doing that, they did that together with JD. Dalian Wanda was the big one, I think, for Tencent, because Dalian Wanda might be a name that's less familiar to people outside China, but they are a huge organization in China. And so that deal was $1.5 billion. And those guys have not just more hotels, but they've got like huge shopping malls all over China. It's a bit, and also cinema chains as well. And then recently, Better Life Malls supermarkets. They did a relatively small, 140 million investment in there. So by the time this podcast gets out, there'll be another deal, I'm sure. And then if you're listening to this in a couple of months or in half a year's time, this information will be, totally changed as well. But that's a lot of deals. And that's it's very clear that there's a competition between the two. And I haven't even put JD's information in there as well. I'm sure There's probably stuff that I'm probably missing a few.
Yeah, I mean, because JD has they have they have a very close partnership with Yonghui. I'm not quite sure exactly what the financials are like, and they also have a very close partnership with Walmart. Um,
Yes.
and I'll have to, yeah. So because Walmart, so Yihao Dian was an online kind of e-commerce store or e-commerce application where you would buy things for the home. So things for the kitchen, food, and things like that. Walmart bought it. And then, if I remember correctly, JD bought it from Walmart, and part of that deal was a close partnership with Walmart. And so offline they have those partnerships. In terms of actual investment, I'm not so clear myself.
Mm.
But I think it is interesting. I mean, because looking at those investments that you listed. I mean, for Alibaba, they're all offline. for for Tencent, they're all offline except for one in VIP shop. And so it seems that Tencent, they're still looking kind of at online plays in terms of e-commerce, in terms of retail. Um, but then, looking at, I mean, so it's actually interesting because the Dalian Wanda deal also included Suning. And Suning is actually a really interesting story
Yes.
because, like I said, both, I mean, so Suning, Guome, as you mentioned, and Dazhong, they weren't doing very well years and years ago with, because they just were not responding very well to online e-commerce. So once, and it's interesting how you think about it. It, Alibaba as proxy was also investing in the Wanda Dalian group as well. So I think that's something really kind of interesting to keep in mind, that on the one hand, they are competing, but on the other hand, they are also investing in similar things. And I think that with the Wanda deal, a lot of that was, it's just a little bit too good to be true. It would be foolish not to take part in that type of investment. I mean, as you said, Wanda, they're huge. They haven't been doing so well over the last year. Some have speculated it's political reasons, that Wang Jianlin, the founder, he lost his political protection in the central government, his patronage, and so has been coming under a lot more scrutiny. Part of it is also capital controls. Wanda was expanding quite aggressively outside of China, but then with tightening capital controls, that's become a bit more difficult. And so, to service their debt, they sold off part of their operations. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah, definitely. There's an element of that, I believe, to the Dalian Wanda deal. Um, yeah, you've alluded to the VIP shop being not offline retail. There has been some talk I've seen that I believe it is true that there is. Tencent has tried to build up a coalition of sort of anti Alibaba coalition of e-commerce players. They are willing to support and partner with anyone who will help them, who's competing with Alibaba in online retail. So that would, JD, of course, but also, people like Pinduoduo, who've had a massive growth. And they've been on one of the really interesting stories in the past 12 months. That company, we haven't really covered it on the podcast, but those guys have had explosive growth, and that mostly is off the back of WeChat that they've been doing that. And then, VIP shop. Anyone who's in this space, Mushroom Street, Mugojie is another one that they've invested in. I think it's quite clear their strategy there is to support all the small players in this market and help them against Alibaba. With regard to how they're doing, why are all these traditional offline retailers partnering up? So it's, I think you've mentioned it a bit, John. Like they're not, a lot of them aren't doing so well. A lot of them are getting because of this trend of online e-commerce becoming more and more popular in China. That's been hurting a lot of offline retail. Having said that, the growth in online retail is slowing, and I think it's popularly considered that the it will the majority of retail will continue to happen offline. And even if I think China globally is one of the highest percentages of online to offline retail, but even so, the amount of in terms of volume of goods sold, or value of goods sold rather, is less than 20% for sure. I've seen a couple of different estimations, but they're all in this kind of like teens area of e-commerce being a percentage of total retail. And so it's clear that it's not everything is going to go online. The offline retail is going to maintain as the core of where most things are bought. And so given how that's that's not going to change, it makes sense for Alibaba in particular. They're going to, the writings on the wall, well, we're doing really fantastic in e-commerce, and that's been going well for years. But we can see that if we really want to take a cut or be involved in all of retail, then we have to go offline, because the fact is that people buy a lot of stuff, most of their stuff, in fact, offline. And that's probably not going to change. People want to touch things and see things in the real world before they make the purchase. And so that's part of what's driving the push for them, that for Alibaba in particular, or for JD in particular. It makes that's one of the core reasons why it makes sense for them to move into this space. Because that, we talk a lot about all these fantastic e-commerce numbers, and every time this 11/11 festival, the number goes up by an incredible percentage each year. But if you take a step back and look at all commerce, all retail, it's still, it doesn't compare to offline.
Yeah, and I think that it's interesting too, because I mean, we talked with the CEO of Bingo Box late last year at TechCrunch, and one of the things he said was that they're really looking at tier 3 and tier 4 cities as one of the main drivers of growth. And it's interesting, you take that data point and you couple it with this other initiative that Alibaba is doing right now with Tmall, and what they're doing is they're approaching mom and pop convenience stores in tier 3, tier 4 cities and smaller villages, and saying, hey, we will finance almost all of the renovation and stuff like that, but the everything has to be Tmall branded. It's Tmall branded. People use Alipay to pay and things like that. And so it's actually really interesting to see how Alibaba is approaching retail in general, and in particular these smaller areas where a lot of purchases are made, and I have to wonder, in part, if one of the reasons that Tencent is becoming more active is because they need to protect their acquisition channel. They need to protect one of their core businesses, which is now mobile payments. And the thing is, mobile payments happen, as you were saying, I mean, only 20% of retail happens online. Well, that means that 80%, so 70 to 80%, well, that's a bit optimistic perhaps, but let's say 60 to 70% of mobile payments are happening offline then. So for Tencent to protect people, so to actually have people using WeChat Pay, not allowing Tmall or Taobao or Alibaba to go into a retail area or a retailer taking over a retailer, they have to start making their own moves into this sector so that they don't get completely cut off. Because this is the thing. I mean, in China, it is standard operating procedure for competing companies to not allow their competitors' service inside the other app. So a great example is, if you try to send a Taobao link to someone inside of WeChat, it will not open. And the same is true for Alibaba. They will block links to WeChat stores or any kind of WeChat content on their platforms, and so it would be reasonable to expect that they would do something offline as well.
That's a really great point, John. That's a really great point about the mobile payments. I think a lot of I got my suspicions that mobile payments is one of the core reasons for these guys to move in so heavily into this space. And it's hard not to think that for Tencent, it might be the reason, perhaps, for them. We can't underestimate the importance of mobile payments. It's really a very critical area, and you're exactly right that if Tencent was to let Alibaba rather, just go ahead and dominate this area, it would be really leaving them vulnerable to them cutting them off by having Alipay as an exclusive, mobile payment channel. So they can't allow that to happen. And I believe that, I'm seeing, I don't know if you've noticed this, John, but in China, like in the last 4 or 5 months, Alipay has been moving very aggressively into offline in terms of they have this this sort of hongbao, this red packet deal. You'll see it in all the convenience stores where they have this special QR code for Alipay that you scan, and then you're guaranteed to get a small discount if you scan it first and use Alipay. So that's a very, very classic marketing technique in this area. It's essentially subsidizing the transaction in order to gain traffic to. But the amount of money that Alipay must be spending to do that is absolutely incredible. Because it's everywhere. I would say it's difficult to find a small store in China that doesn't have one of those promotional codes from Alipay in it. And a lot of people do use it from what I can see. And so they're really just spending money to get people to use Alipay. That's the marketing technique, but it does work. It's effective. Chinese are very sensitive on price, and they will scan a special code just to save a very, very small amount of money, actually.
Well, it's funny, actually, because Alipay and Nielsen released a report recently about spending habits and preferences of Chinese people going abroad. And you say price, but actually this report makes a really interesting distinction. What they found was that Chinese spenders, they're more interested in the discount. So they're more interested in the relative price. And whereas non-Chinese that they surveyed were more interested in the absolute price, so the actual price after the discount. Whereas Chinese people are more likely to make a purchase decision or more likely to purchase something if they perceive a higher discount, not necessarily that the overall item is cheaper. And so I just wanted to jump in there and make that quick distinction.
No, that's really interesting point. Yeah, I saw that report, and I did look at that, and also made the same conclusion. It's very interesting. It's easy to overlook that, but in terms of the psychology of the payment, it is important. There's these guys are still spending a lot of money. Perhaps they're spending even more money than ever to help subsidize payments in this area. The battle between Alipay and WeChat Pay is as fierce as it's ever been.
Exactly.
And I think that is playing into a lot of what's going on here, is that this is so important. These guys have the chance to take through these payment options, which are fast becoming, taking over. They're still growing. That chart of the total amount of money running through these payment channels. It's still growing very, very fast, and is projected to do so for the next couple of years in China. This is a huge opportunity for these guys to take a cut of pretty much all economic activity.
Exactly, and that's actually
that's a strong motivator. We can't ignore this.
Well, exactly, and I think that because it's not just mobile payments either. It's also taking money out of your your bank account and storing it inside of Alipay or storing it inside of WeChat. Basically, either making some of the largest deposit pools in the country, and in many cases, the largest money market funds in the country with the Alipay products and WeChat Pay products. Um, so
And
so
then
I
the
think that
data.
yeah, exactly. Oh, I mean, which is huge. And then, I mean, like, projected out another 10 years or so. And when China does finally roll out their digital currency, and Alipay and WeChat Pay are in the middle of all of that. I mean, so if and when China does make a full conversion to digital money, I mean, it's going to be through Alipay and WeChat Pay. And so, to kind of go back to what we were talking about a minute ago in terms of protecting those channels. I mean, like, it's so important because it's going to determine the future of these companies. And it's kind of funny. I mean, so we're getting a little bit away from new retail, but I mentioned this before, and I mean, you look at who is winning right now in terms of Alipay, Alibaba, and Tencent, and it's clear that Tencent is both. I mean, just in terms of market valuation, in terms of profitability, and across the board, Tencent is winning. And so it's really kind of interesting to see Alibaba's um, strategy when it comes to all this, because it is basically owning the entire channel. And so it's not just about retail, it's not just about e-commerce, it's about basically owning all transactions. And I think that Tencent and WeChat are probably looking at the exact same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it's so clear about who's winning in this battle. I think there's a lot of both guys are very strong, and in this particular area that we're looking at today, I think Alibaba is probably stronger
Mm.
than Tencent. So a lot of things can happen still. Um, Let's talk about logistics and fulfillment, because I think that's another aspect here that we haven't really touched upon, but is also very, very important of why these guys are doing this. Um, Part of the core experience of the new retail, at least as Alibaba explains it, especially when they're talking about Hema supermarkets, one of the key differentiators for their service is the delivery time. That you, within a 3 kilometer radius of that supermarket, you can open up their app and have the fresh produce delivered within half an hour. That is quite impressive. And I think JD, for their 7Fresh stores, they have a similar time in terms of, and a similar timer. It's almost exactly. So maybe it's slightly better actually. If I remember, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's at least in the same ballpark of what they claim to be able to do in terms of delivery and logistics. So the logistics aspect of this is important in terms of, I think, the expectations of customers in China, of consumers, is really very, very high. And it's a very, very competitive. And I think that's leading into sort of the food delivery aspect. People like Meituan Dianping, Ele.me, these guys have their services been getting is actually also very impressive in terms of
Yes.
the delivery times sometimes that they can get. So in China, because of this fierce competition in this area, because of the size of the cities and the scale and how everyone's packed together in these very highly condensed urban areas, we're able to achieve some very, very impressive experiences for a customer. It's super convenient. And so this is a vector of competition between these guys, because you might have the best price. For e-commerce and for new retail, price is also very important, of course.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But another vector of competition is the speed of delivery, which you can only achieve if you have a network of offline fulfillment centers or physical stores. And it's clear that for at least for how new retail is described for Hema supermarkets, that they're looking at this supermarket not just as a supermarket, but also as a fulfillment center.
Right, which I think is actually super important. So I mentioned JD Daojia before, and it's a service that I use quite often. But one of the biggest problems is that I would say maybe 4 out of 10 times, maybe three or 4 out of 10 times that I've used this service. The So basically the way that JD Daojia works is that they use their delivery people, so people who work directly with JD Daojia, the service, and they partner with other stores, so Walmart, Yonghui, I think Carrefour as well, and some other smaller stores. Where you can order specific items. It can be anything really. I mean, anything that Walmart carries, you can potentially order, and they will deliver it in about an hour or so. But about 3 to 4 times out of 10 that I've used this service, the store will call me directly and say, "Hey, we don't have this thing that you ordered. Can we replace it with something else?" And so I think that's actually one of the big pain points as a consumer, is that what's listed on the app, the store does not actually have there. And one of the big problems is because their inventory database, if they have one, is not connected with JD Daojia. Whereas with Hema or Seven Fresh, they solve that problem. Because potentially, their inventory database is directly connected with the application. I mean, they built it from the ground up, and so I think that your point as a fulfillment center, I think, makes a lot of sense given some issues with delivery in general. But I would say, looking at food delivery, it's really amazing to see how far it's come along, and the amount of electric bikes that I see on the street these days, and just the blossoming of so many on the road, for better or for worse. As a driver myself, it can be a bit dangerous. But I mean, I would say that these companies, they really are perfecting not only the actual delivery times, but the overall experience as well. And they're putting in little gamification, and they're putting in little things to, create a better relationship with the delivery person, to make it a little bit more interesting in terms of delivery. And so I think that delivery in general is this huge area where new retail is already a part of. But then also, I mean, just the experience, I think, of a Hema store. And I mentioned this a little bit before. I think that one of the main drivers of adoption, of rapid adoption in China, is seeking out new experiences. And I think Hema in particular has gotten a lot of attention because it is this new thing. Because it is connected so closely with Alipay, and it is this combination of different types of things, right? It's not. I mean, it's everything kind of all combined into one. So you can get seafood, it's a convenience store, it's a supermarket, it's a restaurant, all these different things. And so for Chinese people, they're many times, I mean, they're looking for a new experience, and so that drives a lot of growth in a lot of verticals and a lot of industries. The key, of course, is to make sure that you keep innovating, or that you keep people coming back.
Yeah, the CEO of Hema described it. I think I got a quote from here. Hema is not a supermarket. It's not a convenience store. It's not a restaurant, nor is it a vegetable market. Some people call it the four nots. It sounds better in Chinese, that last part.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's a mismatch of all these kind of different experiences. I don't know. Personally, it's not very attractive to me. But I'm a guy. I'm not particularly big on spending time in shopping malls and things like that. But a lot of people might find that quite refreshing, to be able to go to a place that combines all these elements. But it does lead into another factor that's going on here, which is that the expectations of consumers are changing in China. Yeah. People expect to be entertained. They expect for consumption to be an experience. And exactly. We see this as, I think where this really hits home for me is in restaurants, actually. In China, the restaurant industry I feel it's just so much further ahead of other places where I visit in the world. because restaurants in China are really about experience these days. You can go to a shopping mall and you go up to the restaurant level, and you'll see all these different restaurants themed really, really nicely around different stuff. And they're really selling an experience. The environment when you go in there is very, very different in each one of
Yeah.
them. And some of them have these sort of crazy themes that for young people. They've got lots of TVs going on in there. It's very noisy in the restaurant. Other ones, I'm just thinking of the last time I was in a mall. They had this restaurant themed around drums, around like
Oh,
traditional
okay.
Chinese drums, and the decoration was amazing and beautiful, and the staff there are all dressed up in these traditional Chinese clothes, and this is very normal. It's not anything special anymore to see restaurants like this all over China. And the prices in them are still okay. It's not like super expensive. It's very affordable for middle class people to go and eat
Exactly.
places regularly. So the expectations in terms of experience for something like a restaurant and for retail in general is really quite high now in China. And so part of that experience can be delivered through technology. You do see a lot of, the companies themselves, I think a lot of their PR communications and articles you read, they will draw attention to these small little bits of technology that are augmenting the experience of retail, whether that's, mirrors where you can try on clothes without actually trying them on. That's a common one for fashion retail. Whether it's, I think Seven Fresh have this. I don't know if you've seen the video, John. There's a video out there that's got quite a lot of attention where they have this shopping cart that you have a wristband, and you put the wristband on, and then the shopping cart will follow you, kind of like a robot.
I haven't seen that.
Oh, it seems very gimmicky.
Yeah.
And it is, to be honest, but there are, we're starting to see little bits of technology come into the experience, I guess, of traditional retail. For me personally, I think the big one will be augmented reality. It's not there yet at all. I can't think of any really good case studies of it. But when augmented reality comes properly, which it will do, it's just a matter of time, I think that's going to really transform offline retail. And I can see, in terms of the strategy here that these guys have, right now, that's something they're definitely looking at down the road. When that technology becomes popular, it's still going to be the big tech giants that probably lead that in China. And so that the augmented reality experience for retail offline is going to be a huge game changer, because you can personalize data. You can personalize the experience, right? So yeah. I think where that is definitely going to be something. It's not talked about much, actually. I haven't read any articles there, but I find it hard to believe they're not thinking about that. The other way that personalizing the experience would be, in terms of the app, the more data they have about you. Actually, I think the Hermar supermarket CEO again said this. The major goal is to drive offline to online. So if you go to one of these supermarkets, you have to download their app if it's Hermar. So you've got their app on your phone, and then when you go back home, now you can make purchases through the app really easily. The delivery time's really fast, but they've got all this data about you. And they're tracking data about, where you're going in the store as well, and what sort of things you're picking up and stuff like that. So the potential there in terms of knowing what you like and then pushing that to you, whether it's on your phone or whether it's through augmented reality later on, is really quite big.
Yeah, totally. And again, I think just in terms of shopping patterns as well. And so, with Alipay, obviously you have that linkage between Taobao, Tmall, and Hema, and then any other purchase you might make through Alipay. But the same is true for WeChat Pay as well. And so with their partnerships, with their their investment in Jingdong, with their investment in Yonghui and Carrefour, and then with Jingdong's Seven Fresh, they have access to all that data. And they can really see where you are, what you're actually purchasing. Although Matt, maybe you can confirm this for me, but I heard recently that the WeChat team, they try not to personalize WeChat ads too much because they're afraid that people might have a bad reaction to it. That it might be over like too personalized, and people will start being a bit wary of using WeChat because of privacy concerns or something like that. Do you have any insight into that?
They're certainly very protective and careful about the advertising experience on
Mm.
moments in particular. I think
Yeah.
less so on articles. I think there's more
Okay.
personalization there. Like you will see items for if you buy something on JD, you can definitely see very personalized adverts for those items on articles. But in terms of the moments advertisement, I wouldn't be surprised because they are like very, very careful on that.
Right, right, and so the reason I bring it up is because talking about personalization, I think that this is kind of a factor that we have to keep in mind. Is this the debate about privacy and kind of how Chinese tech companies they're walking a very fine line between really using the data to its fullest degree and specifically targeting certain products to certain people, and then being a bit careful in terms of how they actually do that and not overdoing it. But I mean, I think that you look at there's so many trends here, technology trends. I mean, so you mentioned the carts, AR, but then also just unmanned delivery is going to be a huge part. Unmanned stores in general, and of course it has to be technology companies that lead the way with a lot of this, and of course it's happening in China. I think the more that you and I talk about this stuff, the more that I'm involved in the tech space in China, it's very, very clear that China really is leading in terms of adoption across the board. It might not always be the best technology. It might not always be the best absolute customer experience, compared to an experience you might have in the West. But in terms of adoption, in terms of implementation, in terms of rollout, China is the first when it comes to new retail and this type of business model.
Yeah, and a lot actually, another point we haven't brought up is that a lot of these companies that they're partnering with, actually, when I was doing some research on it, I went and checked out their websites and did, got a feeling for some of these traditional retailers. They're very traditional. I feel these are guys that are not. They're very far from being embracing technology. And I've seen a couple of quotes from experts in this area when I was reading up on it, saying that in the retail industry, the players here are actually quite scared of being disrupted. These guys are. When I first came to China, I was very surprised. I think a lot of people have expressed the same sort of thing. When you go into a supermarket, it's less so now, but back in the day, it used to be you would go into a supermarket and there was just tons and tons of staff everywhere on every aisle.
Yeah.
It was a very labor intensive industry. And there's a couple of reasons for that. I think the government encouraged it in terms of employment, and those other factors. Labor, of course, 10 years ago in China was much, much cheaper than it is today. But these guys, and you can still do it. You can still go into tier 2 cities in China and walk into supermarkets that are obviously very, what they're doing is quite simple. It's, you pack a bunch of goods into it. There's no real tech behind their heavy tech behind what they're doing at all, or data in terms of it. It's a very, it hasn't changed much, their business over the years in terms of how they do what they do. And these guys really are ripe for disruption. And if you're an organization like this that's got 100 different supermarkets in tier 2, tier 3 cities across China, and what you know that your organization is not very forward thinking in this area, that you guys your strengths do not lie in technology, But you can see what's happening with Alibaba, and you know this is coming to your industry. You are going to be quite scared that
Yeah.
you could wake up in a couple of years and realize that you can't deliver the experience that customers are expecting in China anymore, and your business is suddenly being disrupted. So it does make sense that we've analyzed why Alibaba and Tencent and JD would be wanting to do this, but when you look at the guys they're doing these deals with, they're on the other side of this fence looking at saying, hang on, this wave is coming to us. We can see there's a consumption upgrade in China, that consumers' expectations are rising and rising. And we know that technology is one of the key ways that we can, that certainly our competitors are going to be creating an edge on us. If we don't work with one of these guys, we could end up being out of business in a couple of years.
Well, it's funny you say that because there's a few grocery stores, large chains near my house, and they're trying to do their own app for grocery delivery, and it's horrible. It's absolutely horrible, and the delivery times are bad. I would, as I mentioned before, when I was using JD Daojia, they wouldn't. The three out of four times they wouldn't have an item. I would say in this case, I would say maybe 5 to 6 times out of 10 they wouldn't have an item. And so so there, I think that there are some large companies, some large, in particular grocery stores. They're trying to do it on their own, and to be honest, they're failing quite bad. And so I think that it's kind of interesting that I think that on the one hand, if you're a smart business person and you can see these trends coming, if I was in charge of one of these companies, I'd be like, okay, how can we partner with Tencent? How can we partner with Alibaba? Or maybe do something a little bit different, but actually make it work. Whereas I think that there are still companies that are going to be disrupted because it's pretty clear that they're not adapting to the change very well, which is kind of surprising given the rate and pace of change in China. But I think that at the end of the day, when we're looking at new retail, one of the big questions is going to be user experience and customer experience in general, and it's really kind of interesting to see how, as you were saying, how expectations continue to increase, and I think that there's always going to be a lot of room to do that, and in particular because a lot of times it's almost expected. I think a lot of times that these kind of offline to online services, for whatever reason, that they're not going to work, and then it's just like, okay, fine, it doesn't work. We'll just as a customer, I'll just get around it. But I think that more and more that's not going to be acceptable, and especially younger people living in big cities, if they come across a restaurant that has a QR code system that doesn't work, maybe they won't go back there again. If they try to order something online from a grocery store down the road and it doesn't work, they're not going to order it again. And so, which is, I think, very different from what it was 10 years ago, where, you could only really go to that grocery store down the road if you actually wanted something. And looking at not only delivery services, but then also new retail, and these the fresh produce delivery. I mean, it's changing how people live, literally, quite literally, and I know it has for me. And again, I'm just always amazed by how seemingly rapid that much of this change has occurred.
How would you describe it as changing your life, John?
Oh, I mean, so the thing is, I mean, I work remotely most of the time, and my wife works in an office. So what that usually means is that I'm responsible for picking up my son from school, taking him to after school classes, and cooking dinner. And sometimes for whatever reason we were really busy on the weekend, so I didn't get a chance to go to the grocery store, or maybe maybe there's an ingredient for dinner that I want to cook that I don't have, and so what I can do is I can just very, very easily go on JD Daojia, do a quick search, say, hey, I need some tomatoes, and have the store down the road. They'll deliver it within 45 minutes to an hour. And so if I'm able to, let's say that I'm leaving the office to go pick up my son, if I place the order, then by the time I get home, the stuff is going to be there. It'll arrive maybe 10-15 minutes after I get home. Or maybe I realize that something, like we ran out of eggs. It's like 8 o'clock at night. I ran out of eggs. I don't have anything to cook for breakfast tomorrow. I can use JD Daojia, and they will deliver it. And so I think in that sense, it was always one of the great things about Jingdong, I would say, compared to Taobao. So Taobao has everything you could possibly want, whereas JD, they their selection is going to be much lower, but their logistics and delivery times are much more consistent and much more convenient. And they've done something very similar with their Daojia grocery service, where in general, it's very consistent, and it's amazingly convenient. And so not having to go an hour, 2 hours out of my way on a busy Saturday, I can just have the food delivered.
And I think an element that we've barely touched upon, but is also here, the technological transformation of that process of delivering goods to people. We've got things like JD in particular. They've got they've been experimenting with drones a lot. I don't think a lot of they're using it that much right now, but certainly they're testing out. I know Amazon is also doing the same thing in the States, and then unmanned vehicles as well has a lot of potential in the longer term. I don't think it's there right now, but a couple of years down the road, it could start to be that more and more of these deliveries are done. Again, we're taking the human element out of that part of the process. And again, so these traditional offline retailers are really not well placed to compete with that.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, because talking about poor customer experience, it really is the human element that ends up breaking it most of the time. Where either an unreasonable request that is given into by a customer, or by again, not inventory not being stocked properly, or being synced properly, or the system isn't set up to sync it properly. That's really that's the human element failing to a certain degree. So I think that moving more towards unmanned, moving more towards relying more and more heavily on technology, and friction for purchases of offline it's going to be so low.
Yeah, if you step back and look at it from a high level, it's about. You've got all these goods and things that people want, and a big part of the problem with retail in general is like getting the right thing to the right person at the right time. Right. How do you get something that's made in a factory to being bought, and that whole chain of how that happens? When you look at it holistically, I think a big part of this trend with new retail, or smart retail, is applying technology to solve this issue of how things that are produced are eventually reach the people who are willing to buy them or need them. And so the application of technology in a variety of different ways to this problem is what these guys are saying is going to revolutionize this whole experience.
Yeah, and you add in blockchain into that mix, and I think being able to track the production. You could say I want to buy some tomatoes, or I want to invest in tomato coin, and you can see the tomatoes as they're being grown, as they're being shipped, as they're going to the Hema store, and then as they're coming to your home. And when the tomatoes actually get there, you've had this complete record of what they are, and how they've been grown. And as you say, I think China really is one of my working thesis when I think about innovation in China is that, and in particular when it comes to public policy and the role of government, the government looks at technology right now and says, this can solve so many of our problems. And so a lot of it, we mentioned before, is around enforcement, but then also just social problems in general. Again, you look at the degree to which friction has decreased. So I've been in China for 10 years, and my life is so much easier than it ever was. And it's not just because I'm making more money. It's not just because of, I have an electric bike. It's because, across the board, there's all these different products and services that are designed to decrease that offline friction by offering an online service. And I think that's true for that's going to be true for a whole host of different things, and certainly food supply is a big area of concern for the Chinese government. They're a bit paranoid about that area, and so anything that can improve food supply, but as you say, Matt, not just that also, but then also consumer packaged goods and other types of consumer facing products, the ability to have all of that integrated, I think is because China, it's a very fractured production. So production in China is quite fragmented, and so to have maybe not the actual production less fragmented, but the like having integration technology to do that, I think could be very, very powerful. All the time we have for this episode of China Tech Talk. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, we'd really appreciate it if you gave us a review in iTunes. If you're on Pocket Cast or Overcast, you can tap on that star button and it will recommend this episode to your network. And of course, if you want to get in touch with either Matt or I, you can find our social profiles in the show notes.